And Sean is the one who introduced me to René, and René also has been with us through some extremely challenging times, and his wise counsel. And you know, the wise counsel is always a wonderful thing, but for René, he has been through difficult situations and challenging situations, turnarounds, change processes with some of the greatest leaders in the world. Some of the not so great leaders in the world as well, René, which is at times why René was called in. But those experiences also were extremely helpful for us. Now, first of all, I want to say you all have to read this book, and I know he's brought hundreds of copies that he's giving away to World Bank staff, and part of it is because of one of my colleagues, Shalimar, has a chapter in it, and read that chapter. The chapter is beautifully written, and I think illustrates the premise very, very strongly. You know, I worked so intimately with René, but I don't recall sitting back and having a talk with him about his overall philosophy and approach to leadership and organizational strengthening. And so it was new to me when I read Spikes, but it made such perfect sense, and it explained to me why we've had such a good working relationship, because the approach that he's taking is very similar to an approach that I was taught pretty early in my career, in around the early 2000s. I've been interested in leadership for a very long time. And I went out to a place called the Gallup Leadership Institute. And this was in this was in much earlier than that. It was in 1994. I was part of a Kellogg National Leadership Program. And part of what they did was they took us to the Gallup. And the Gallup Institute, it started off with being the folks who do the Gallup polls. But then what happened was that the Gallup polls were done by lots of folks who had degrees in psychology, for example, and they began becoming interested in leadership. And so when I went out there, they gave us all a book, and the title of the book, and I'm sure René knows it well, Don Clifton, Soar with Your Strengths was a title of the book. And it was just a complete frame shift for me, because when I went out there, normally what I thought leadership was that you identify your weaknesses and then you work to transform your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. And the Gallup Institute said, we've actually studied this. We've done polls, we've done surveys, and most of the time that doesn't work. And so what they taught us was identify what your strengths are and do more of that, and then manage your weaknesses. And so this happened in 1994, and then in every leadership position I've had, I've always tried to find people, like Sean, for example, like Fareed in the back, who's now my chief of staff, that you have to be as humble and honest with yourself as you can possibly be about what your strengths and weaknesses are. And usually that comes from doing a 360 analysis, because the people around you are very clear about what your strengths and weaknesses are. So this can't be something that you tell yourself. This has to be something that you hear from others. And so in every position that I've been in, I've tried to find people to work with me who are able to do those things that either I can't do or that I don't like doing. And so this is precisely what Spikes is. And so when I read this book, I thought, well, of course we got along so well. And of course it worked out so well. And he was so helpful to us as a group, because this is sort of the way that I had been taught now, 25 years ago, about how to think about leadership. So this is an extremely important book. And it's an extremely hopeful book, because when René talks about Spikes, his basic assumption, his fundamental assumption, it's almost an act of faith. René believes that everyone has a spike. And some of you might not think you have a spike, but everyone does. And then to think about not only the spike, and the way René took this beyond the Leadership Institute at Gallup was René talks about how to understand what your own spike is, but then understand how you can take your spike and find others who either have very different or similar or compatible spikes, and then build that team together. So this is his impact on us and on me has been tremendous. I know he has worked with now groups throughout the World Bank Group, with now the African Development Bank. I am certain that he's going to continue to have a big impact, not only in the corporate world, but in this world where we're trying to do something that's not a foregone conclusion, which is to make multilateralism work. So I want to thank him for being here. I want to thank him for all the things that he's done for us. And you're in for a treat listening to René Carayol. Thank you.